Well, hi there. This is a Fox 9 all-day live alert. I'm Tim Blotz. And any moment now, we are expecting to hear from Governor Walz as he discusses the state's brand new red flag law. Now, this is a law that Democrats have been trying to pass for a number of years, and were finally able to do it when they took control of the legislature this past year. Now, the governor signed this public safety bill back in May that included the red flag law that went into effect yesterday. What this law does is it allows authorities to ask the courts for protection orders to temporarily take guns away from people who are a threat to themselves or others. Here's Governor Walz. Let's go to the news conference right now from the governor's reception room at the Capitol.
Well, good afternoon, everyone, and Happy New Year to all of you. Welcome back. We're glad you're here and getting 2024 off to a positive start. 2023 was a year that a lot of things got done to try and improve the lives of Minnesotans, whether it was reducing hunger and homelessness, whether it was focusing on education and mental health, whether it was moving towards smart climate policies, or it was finally saying enough is enough of nothing but thoughts and prayers when it comes to gun violence and the ability to prevent tragic shootings with firearms. And so we're here today to talk a little bit about the law that went into effect yesterday, the extreme risk protection orders, or the red flag laws, something that 19 other states have done, something that the data, as we're starting to get in, is relatively new in many places of doing this, has huge potential when people are in crisis to simply remove firearms from the situation. And what we see is then we see better outcomes of Minnesota's firearm deaths over the last several years, and last year in particular. Over 70% of those were suicides. And one of the tools that this uses is anyone, family members, being able to, when someone's in crisis, be able to petition the courts, using folks' right to be able to redress their grievance if they don't agree with this, and do it the right way, with the judicial branch being the lead agency on this, but seeing that sometimes people can't see when they're in crisis, and if you're able to remove that firearm from that situation, you're able to save lives. So I'm excited about this being able to go into effect. We've got folks here who worked on this, advocates who have worked on gun safety. Senator Latz, the lead author in the Senate with this. You're going to hear from Chief Henthorn, who is the police have to implement this, and I think you probably all have questions, as we did when we wrote this law. How are you actually going to make this operational? How are things going to work? And then you'll hear from Rolf and some of the folks, as I said, who have dedicated their time to making sure that we're reducing gun deaths. This is a positive thing, coupled with enhanced background checks that went into effect earlier last year, enhanced penalties around the use of sear switches, making weapons fully automatic, making sure that we continue to move forward. And I know that there was a story around this weekend, something that we've advocated for, safe gun storage and gun locks. I don't know a single gun owner, myself included, who hasn't been putting trigger locks and locking their weapons as long as I can remember. It was just the common sense thing that you did. And we had a program with, you'll hear from Commissioner Cunningham, can speak a little bit about it. Our gun lock giveaway program gave over 50,000 of these away, and we simply ran out at State Fair of so many people wanting these. These are just simple things that you make this available to folks. They lock up the guns, and we know we have these tragic incidents of children getting into the guns, shooting someone in their home or themselves. So this is a good move forward. I'm glad Minnesota finally got here. This was after years of just no hearings, nothing happening, and stonewalling, and this is smart. And I say this as a gun owner, as a veteran, as a lifelong hunter. None of these things infringe upon your constitutional rights to safe usage of firearms. What they do is they save lives, and they make our cities and our homes a little bit safer. With that, I'm going to turn this over to Lieutenant Governor Flanagan.
Thank you, Governor. Good afternoon. Over the past few weeks, we have been highlighting many laws that took effect yesterday on January 1st, from earned sick and safe time to closing the racial and gender pay gap. However, all of these laws and dozens of other big overdue changes in 2023, I can say that this law is different, because this law will save lives. And it's moments like this where we can see the power of really good policymaking, the power of coming together to find solutions, the power of refusing to sit on the sidelines any longer while our neighbors and relatives and children are losing their lives to preventable gun violence. And I can't talk about this legislation without acknowledging the impact that this will have on survivors of domestic violence. Every month in the United States, roughly 70 women are shot and killed by intimate partners. And from 2011 to 2020, there was a 6% increase in intimate partner homicides of women. 70 daughters, sisters, mothers, and friends every month. But we will not accept that as our reality here in Minnesota. We have the power to make a difference, to save lives, and through laws like this one, we can make a safer and better Minnesota. So if your partner or family member or friend has a history of abuse, dangerous behavior, or suicidal thoughts, you can now take action. You can help yourself, and you can help others. If this law saves just one life, it is a success. And with that, I'd like to introduce the bill author, Senator Latz.
Thank you. So good afternoon. It's with a great deal of gratitude that I'm here today to thank all the people that made this possible. The legislature, of course, is where I do most of my work, but so much of that work to be successful in the legislature depended on the planning and the activation, the contacts and networking of all the stakeholders that were involved. Moms Demand Action, Protect Minnesota, have been working on these issues for years along with me. I want to make a specific point of expressing appreciation to my co-authors in the Senate, Senator Bonnie Westland, Senator Ann Rest, and Senator Dr. Elise Mann. And in the House, our chief author, Representative Cedric Frazier, who also did a terrific work there. And, they can have up to 35 co-authors in the House. We don't get that luxury in the Senate. So we had to cut the line off, but I'm going to identify a few of the key ones. Chair Kelly Moeller, Chair Jamie Becker-Finn, Speaker Melissa Hortman, my colleague from the House, Cheryl Iwakim, Representative Jenny Cleavorn, and Representative Dave Pinto, who has, Representative Pinto and I have been working on these gun issues going back down to the background checks for, well over a decade now. There's not a lot of data on the states that have recently enacted, but Connecticut passed their red flag law in 1999. And we knew early on that the data shows that it is effective. You never know in an individual case for sure, because if you prevent someone from having access to firearms, then you would never really know if they would have gone and gotten that firearm and done something with it, had it still been, in their bedside drawer. But they can compare incident rates. And when you look at the other states that have enough studies, enough data, you can see the success of it. Maryland, for example, prevented 4 incidents of violence against schools in the first 3 months after it was passed. We've seen extreme risk laws used to remove firearms from a Florida resident who said that murder would be, quote, fun and addicting, and a Vermont resident who kept a diary titled Journal of an Active Shooter. So I think you can be fairly confident that had the guns not been removed from those persons, that there was going to be some gun violence following that. And we also know in California, in a little broader study that involved 6 states, 10% of the guns that were removed were said to have prevented mass violence. So this really is, in my judgment, going to be effective. And it's a little odd, and I think part of this is sort of getting the message out, and part of it is getting across the ideological lines. Because, I sent out I don't know if you even call it, I sent out an X, I sent out a tweet when this, in the last week, and I got a reply from someone who said, Senator Latz, this is never going to work. Won't make any difference. And these are people who may feel that way, but they don't know the data. They don't know how this law is going to work. And I think they're just completely wrong, and I'm willing to stake my legislative work on it. I also want to express appreciation to the Giffords organization, the Minnesota County Attorneys Association, that has been working on this for many years as well, and the Minnesota chapters, the American Academy of Pediatrics and the American College of Physicians. So it's not often we get to stand up here and say what we did will in fact save lives, but absolutely this one will. The thing is, we will never know for sure which lives were saved, but we will know in the abstract that there are a lot of people walking around, still walking around, and will for years and years because we passed this law. Thank you. I want to introduce Chief Henthorn is next.
Good afternoon. My name is Jay Henthorn, I'm the Police Chief of the City of Richfield. I'm here today on behalf of the Minnesota Chiefs of Police Association. We represent over 300 police chiefs in the state of Minnesota and over 500 command staff members across the state. As an association, we work collectively throughout the state as chiefs to work with our community members to enact this new tool meant to keep people safe. Minnesota is now the latest state to bring into law the possible use of an extreme risk protection order, or as some people have called it, the red flag law. I want to thank Commissioner Jacobson for directing his staff to put information about IRPA laws on the Department of Public Safety's website to assist us in law enforcement. When a person is in crisis and considering harming themselves or others, they often exhibit clear warning signs. Family members and law enforcement are usually the first people to see these signs. But in too many cases, they have few tools to take preventive action despite picking up on those signs. Extreme risk protection orders empower loved ones or law enforcement to intervene and temporarily prevent someone in crisis from accessing those firearms. These laws can help de-escalate emergency situations. Any number of people can work to get that person help. That's important. A chief law enforcement officer, a city or county attorney, or the person's family or household members can reach out for help by asking the courts for an extreme risk protection order, all with the idea of keeping people safe. And make no mistake, that is the line with why law enforcement officers get up and put on our badges and uniforms every day. We come to work to help people and keep people safe. It's what drives us to the profession of service and what will drive us as we work with our communities and each branch of the justice system with this law. As we've worked through this law, we've worked with many of the branches that are represented here today. We also know that this law alone isn't the only way that people who are concerned for the safety of themselves or loved ones can reach out for help. There are civil harassment restraining orders, civil and family orders for protection, and criminal domestic abuse no contact orders. To be clear, none of these tools, none of these protections or no contact orders takes the place of calling 911 if there is an emergency need. Of all these steps, however, when you put into responsible use, we will help to keep more people safe and save lives as stated today. That is why we are here today. That is why we in law enforcement are out there every day, because we want to keep all of you safe. Thank you, and I'll turn it over to Pastor Olson.
Thank you, Chief. My name is Rolf Olson. I'm a member of Minnesota Gun Owners for Safety. Gun Owners for Safety was founded by former Congresswoman Gabby Giffords. She's a gun owner and a survivor of gun violence. But as a gun owner and a survivor of gun violence myself, I'm here to recognize the important step that Minnesota is taking today. It's a step that will make our families safer. 16 years ago, my daughter was tragically murdered with a firearm. Catherine was a star student. She was creative. She was adventurous. She was well loved by many, especially by children. So when she answered a Craigslist ad for a temporary nanny, she didn't know it would lead to her death. It was front page news for several days. Our family was devastated. The grief we experienced then is now experienced by over 500 Minnesotans every year. Surveys show that over half of our citizens know someone who has been killed or wounded by a misused gun. Almost 3/4 of those deaths are by suicide. As a pastor and as a police chaplain, I have firsthand knowledge of the trauma caused by the misuse of firearms. I've buried people who shot themselves. I have counseled with cops who are struggling with the trauma that they saw at some gruesome scene that they were called to serve. I will not accept the argument that these deaths and the trauma associated with them are simply the cost of doing business for the freedom to own a gun. I'm glad that our state doesn't accept this either. Like the vast majority of gun owners, I know that we can protect the Second Amendment and we can take common sense measures to protect our loved ones. Those opposed to any new gun safety ideas say the problem is mental illness, not our gun laws. That's certainly a factor, but mental illness plagues every nation. Sky-high gun death rates only plague the U.S. because our laws make it so easy for troubled individuals to arm themselves with deadly weapons. People in crisis deserve to get the treatment that they need. They should have mental health services that will help them get well. They should not have deadly weapons. This law will give law enforcement the opportunity and the tools they need to prevent tragedies and to protect their families. The law we recognize today won't stop every gun death. There's no single action that will do that. But it will save many people's lives. It will stop untold numbers of fathers and mothers and friends and neighbors from knowing the pain that our family felt when we got the news that our daughter had been murdered. Thank you, Governor Walz and the Minnesota Legislature for taking this positive step. Common sense policies like this one have been proven to reduce gun violence now in 19 states, and Minnesota is the 20th. We gun owners support it. We survivors support it. I commend all of you standing up here for helping to improve the health and safety of our state. Now I will turn it back over to our governor.
Thank you. Well, thank you, Pastor, and thank you for turning tragedy into action. And I, too, would echo our thanks to the Giffords organization and specifically my freshman colleague in Congress, Gabby Giffords. Some of you have heard the story. She and I went into Congress together and kind of kindred spirits, and we both hunted and owned guns, and we also were the two who started the Congress on Your Corners. And on the day she was doing, on that Saturday morning, doing her Congress on a corner, I think I was in Rochester doing one when we got the news. And so, again, turning a horrific situation into massive change across the country with all of our partners. And I'd give one final thank you to Minnesota's First Lady, who has made this a passion of hers and has worked on it since we came into office. Simply making a call down in that rotunda, let us have a hearing. Let us talk about ways we can make this better. And I think the pastor made it as clear as possible on this. This isn't a Second Amendment issue. This is a public safety issue. And the false choice that, again, we have to live the way we do in this country when other nations do not is unacceptable. So we're doing our part in Minnesota, and I am grateful for all of these. And a final thank you to law enforcement that has to confront these dangerous situations every single day. Their support of these common sense pieces of legislation go a long ways to having the public start to understand and buy in. So with that, we've got some folks up here. We'd be glad to take some questions.
Governor, where do you go from here? I assume you're not done in terms of trying to regulate guns.
Well, it's not about just regulating the guns. It's about making Minnesota safer. And I think, as you heard Senator Latch talk about the data, some of it's hard to capture. It's hard to prove a negative. As I mentioned earlier, I do think something that we didn't get done last time, I think the gun locks legislation makes sense. St. Paul has it. I think you can do some of those. We saw some smart legislation like ghost guns coming up in Colorado to make sure we don't have these off-record, unserialized guns, people putting these together. And again, none of these things threatens lawful owners. Nothing happened, and I heard people with the new background checks or whatever. Well, now I can't even give my child no, that's not true. That's not true. I have my, my grandfather's shotgun, and if he were still alive to give it to me like he did then, it's the same today. What we're talking about is handguns. You're not going to get a handgun off Craigslist for somebody you don't know and not have the ability to understand where these are happening. That's just smart. And I think what we're seeing is, and what I'm grateful for the activism of the folks who are here, that tired, old, we can't do anything or you're threatening our Second Amendments is just crap. That is not true. We know that, and we're going to make a difference. So I think what, Tom, it looks like, let's see these things that are working. Let's start implementing them. Let's start building more of a coalition. I hope, and I'm starting to see it, more and more folks step off the sidelines of saying, you know what, we do need to do some of these things. We can't wake up every single day to a mass shooting. We can't have bullets flying through the homes and hitting 10 and 11-year-olds in St. Paul. That just cannot happen. And each one of these, and I appreciate, and Lieutenant Governor's right, this saves one life, that's good enough, because to not do anything with the idea to make it a Second Amendment issue, not right. So I think there's more to do, but I'd look first. I've always believed this. I think it makes no sense not to have the safe storage piece in there. I think we can do that one. Yeah, good. Yeah. Sure.
So can you describe how you might train your folks to do an assignment like this? I mean, it just is a stressful and potentially dangerous assignment to start with. Is there a way that your officers could approach the confiscation setting to make it as safe as possible?
I mean, our goal is to make it safe for everybody involved, for our community members, our officers. I mean, you know, in this process, similar to domestic no contact order or restraining order, once that's served through the judicial system and we have to do a search warrant, our goal is to make it safe for everybody and to train our officers, as we've always trained them, to make sure that that is safe as possible. Now, looking at the totality of the circumstances, that's something that we have to look at. But we want to make sure that everybody's safe in these situations when we have to go with a search warrant and take weapons. Obviously, people can voluntarily turn them in, and obviously that's what we would prefer. But if we have to execute search warrants, that's something that we'll have to do.
So just without giving away tactics necessarily, this is always a two-officer assignment?
I can't say that for sure. I mean, again, each incident's different. We have to look at the totality of the circumstances. We don't know what the officers are faced with. I mean, if they go there and we were able to get an emergency order, and then we have to get search warrants, or, you know, those are some things that we have to take into consideration.
How hard of a process is it? So say someone is at home and they have a loved one they're concerned about or in crisis. From the call, A, who do they call? And B, what's the process then by which they get the ball rolling, so to speak, to get to the point where there would be a search warrant? Do you understand that?
Yes, I do. The forms to comply with this are on the court website, Minnesota State Court website. They can fill out those forms. Then the forms can be submitted to the district court judge. Those forms are then reviewed by that district court judge, and then at that point it's determined whether or not that ERPO is going to be enacted. It could be denied. It could be emergency ERPO. Well, then law enforcement will be contacted. And then usually, if it is accepted, there's a hearing within 14 days.
Yeah, Senator Latz, perhaps. Can you get is this something you all are going to try this session, the lockbox legislation, and can you get that through the Senate?
Well, that's always the big question, right? And we didn't know we could get this through the Senate until late in the game. I don't know for sure what we're going to introduce, what we're going to come together as a caucus, what we can get 34 votes on. Personally, I think safe storage would be a high priority. And you know, there are different ways of doing that too. You know, there's the lockbox, there's the trigger locks, there's, and you can have requirement for every household, or you can have it, as some states have done, where it's a little more narrowly focused, households with young kids and so on. So there are a lot of different ways to look at it. You know, I got back from the White House a couple of weeks ago for a gun violence prevention seminar About 150 legislators from around the country were there, including a number of us from Minnesota. And there are all sorts of ideas out there and things that are possible. You know, I can't tell you for sure right now what we'll come together on and try to advance this year. It'll be a count by count, you know, a head by head count on that one though, because we need 34 for sure to be able to pass stuff. We'd welcome a broad bipartisan support for these things too.
I have another question for the chief, if I may. During the debate in the Senate, I'm forgetting who it was, but there was a Greater Minnesota legislator who basically said, like, this is only as good as the sheriff's willing to comply. I know you're with the Police Chiefs Association, but I'm curious, you know, have you taken rank of your members about their, you know, because law enforcement can make these petitions and they could maybe know the signs more than a family member might because they've engaged with individuals before. So is there some kind of fundamental resistance among members to this? Do you feel that that could be a, you know, kind of barrier to doing this and making it work effectively?
I think, you know, when you look at whether or not there's any resistance, I think when you look at what we're adhered to follow, which is the state legislature and the laws that are enacted, you know, the people that I've talked to, I mean, this is just another tool in the toolbox, so to speak. It's like a DANKO, which is a domestic abuse contact order, restraining order. So, you know, when we see these situations as law enforcement, if we see these signs, then that gives us another tool in our toolbox. But I think it's not just law enforcement. I think it gives people, family members, guardians, people that see a person in crisis, the ability to take action, especially in a situation where they have weapons, to make sure that their family members are safe. And I think that's what the word needs to be and to get out, is that, you know, regular people, family members can do this. It doesn't always have to be law enforcement.
Is there some sort of educational component? I mean, like, what are people supposed to look for?
Well, I think, you know, it goes back to probably, you know, educating our communities in this law and knowing what to look for, and meeting with communities to understand that, you know, this is an option in a situation where you have a family member who has firearms or has made threats or things like that.
Chief, I don't know if you'll know the answer, or the senator or the governor, but will the state be tracking how many orders are requested and then how many are approved? Or will that be something that we would have to track through individual court systems? But will we have big picture data on the numbers there?
Good afternoon, everybody. Bob Jacobson, Commissioner of Public Safety. When it comes to data, the courts will be tracking the number of orders that are requested, ERPO orders. What we will not be tracking and sharing right now always will be the outcome of those incidents, but the state courts will track that information. The BCA will also be working with the state courts to make sure that law enforcement also is starting to get a holistic view of the court orders that are coming in, those that are served, and eventually potentially the outcome. But we're still working through some of that data sharing piece. We're all interested in watching what the data says. I think it's really going to be important for all of us to pay attention to where those needs are and what the data reflects. I also want to go back to a question that was asked earlier about other law enforcement agencies, sheriffs and police departments. I do want you to know that through this entire process, as we've been working together with the state courts and our stakeholders, we've also involved Minnesota Sheriff's Association and the State Police Chiefs Association. We've been having ongoing weekly, sometimes bi-weekly meetings, talking about this process, making sure that law enforcement and our partners are prepared, that they know the process with these orders, and to make sure that our law enforcement partners understand their role in this really important order that, again, as the governor has said and many others, I think can save lives.
Chief, sorry, follow up on that. Do you mean that on not knowing the outcome, that it wouldn't be the outcome on individual requests, or will we know like 30% resulted in, you know, approval of the order to take the firearms? Will we even know like a big percentage number?
You'll have to ask the state court system that. I'm not sure what the exact measurements are that they will be able to share as far as those percentages. The They will collect that data, they'll be working through that data, and we're going to make sure that we're working the BCA law enforcement with them to make sure that we have access to that data as well.
I can add to that a little bit if you want.
Yep.
Just to add to that a bit, there's nothing in the legislation that says these orders are non-public. So, you know, have at it. Make your requests, go keep track of these things. There's also a mandate. There's a reason why there are multiple paths to the courthouse here. Because law enforcement isn't always the ones that have the best information, and they're not always, in some communities, trusted. And in some communities, there's just not a lot of confidence that a particular agency is going to follow through. So you've got the family members that can go in and fill out their own petitions. And when that happens, the law enforcement agencies, specifically in the legislation, will be notified that a petition has been filed. So they'll have an opportunity to share with the court whatever information they have in connection with the person that is being proposed to have the firearms removed. You know, this is really significant because, you know, if you're in a family and you know someone is suicidal, there's an average of 1 suicide a day in Minnesota by firearms. So sometimes law enforcement may not know. You know, they may have no idea that someone's mindset has gotten to the point where that's what they're thinking, but their families might. And their family might think the fastest thing to do is to go on the court's website, or they can call the county attorney's office, they can call 911 and get some direction of what their options are. So there are multiple pathways to get into a judge. Ultimately, it's the judge that makes the decision.
Do state patrol?
Pardon me?
Do state patrol, do state police have any jurisdiction to execute an order? What if I'm in a county and the sheriff's a posse comitatus follower and doesn't believe in any of this? Am I out of luck?
I don't know that there's any formal rule. You can ask the commissioner.
Yeah, good afternoon again. In answer to your question, what I would say is that the State Patrol's mandate and their primary objective is not service of these orders. That falls to local jurisdictions. It's whether it's the local sheriff's office or the police departments that service them. Those are the ones that are going to be responsible for serving these orders. Now, what I will tell you is that law enforcement is steeped in tradition and duty. And when I think law enforcement officers receive their duty, the request to serve these orders, our expectation and our from what we gather, our expectation would be that they would follow through and serve those orders.
Commissioner and Chief, maybe if you want to weigh in on this too. You know, there's going to be a lot of steps with this. You just mentioned. How are you guys going to make sure this is a high priority? It's going to get lost in the bureaucracy of all of these different people involved. These will be handled with a sense of urgency.
I think once we get notified by the court, as Commissioner Jacobson talked about, that's a sense of duty. Once we receive these, we will make sure, as the CLEO and the CLEOs across the state of Minnesota, we have to notify these people, so we have to stay up on if one is coming to that jurisdiction. So we'll be on top of that to make sure that we serve the proper notices and make sure that we take the appropriate action.
Senator Lance, is there anything in this law to keep people from abusing this law, filing a complaint against somebody just out of spite or because they have a grudge or whatever?
It's a gross misdemeanor crime if they say anything false in a petition to the court. It's a pretty, my judgment, a pretty significant deterrent. You know, does that stop people? Not all the time. There probably will be some instances of that. But you know, if someone's willing to commit a crime to falsify a petition, I mean, that's one reason we don't have, say, neighbors in there. So they're not going to settle grievances, you know, over a fence, something like this. A neighbor doesn't have standing to file such a petition. Family members, yes, you know, but there are a lot of things that intra-family squabbles that we're not going to be able to legislate about. On balance, I think these pathways to the courthouse are the ultimate due process. So even when a judge looks at a petition and says there is grounds that are alleged, that are credible enough from what we know to issue an order, the subject of that order can immediately ask for a full evidentiary hearing, and it must be held within 14 days. So it would only be a temporary deprivation of their firearms until they get into a full hearing, and then anyone who has evidence to provide on one side or the other will be able to present that to a judge.
two more on or off topic.
I just mentioned, if I could, Commissioner Jacobson mentioned and Chief Henthorn both focused on this, that the process that'll happen. I think it is important to note, though, that 911 is still your route if you're in an emergency situation, if you're in a crisis, and because the questions are good. Is the bureaucracy going to go there, Senator Latz? This has been well thought out, making sure that the abuse is addressed, making sure that the speed, and again, I trust our law enforcement officers to put it in, but we all know you get in a crisis situation, that piece of paper is not going to be as effective as making sure you call. But any final?
One off topic.
Sure.
Before we run out of time. The Polk County sent a letter saying they're against the new flag. I realize that these flags.
I appreciate their input. That's the way it works.
I guess your thoughts and if it becomes a political issue going into the next session.
Yeah, well, the process was to make sure we had a more inclusive flag. I think we all know that there were issues, especially amongst our indigenous Minnesotans, and we modernized our flag, and it was it was an interesting process with a lot of folks taking part in that. It'll go in front of the legislature, and they'll make a decision, and so they certainly have every right to say they disagree, but again, I appreciate their input.
Do you like it?
Pardon me?
Do you like the flag?
Oh, yeah, I think it's great. I think I was rooting for, and I didn't
You've
know,
been
in
listening to
full
Governor
disclosure,
Tim
one of
Walz
the
and
applicants
members
was
of his
making a West
administration,
graduate,
along
so I
with
was a little
State Senator
I
Ron
know,
Latz,
there he
talking
is.
about the new red flag law that went into effect yesterday. What this law essentially does, it allows family members and the court, actually law enforcement, to petition the court to take firearms away from an individual who may be a threat to themselves or others. I've covered the legislature for many years, and I can tell you that since this inception, there have been many lines, socially, politically, and constitutionally, that were deeply divided on this particular issue. About 20 states have now passed these red flag laws across the country. And again, after this petition is filed, the court has to grant 14 days before there is a hearing, before any action can get taken place. And you heard the chief of police from Richfield say that these applications are now available on the Minnesota State Court's website. So this is the news conference wrapping up. We are going to continue with Fox 9 all day, right after a short break.
This is an all-day live alert.